We're approaching the start of Lent, and as ever in Scotland, the 40 Days for Life group, which is a pro-life group, will be present outside of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital for the 40 days of Lent, praying for an end to abortion and offering some material support to women who may feel lost in a crisis pregnancy and lacking support. But in recent years, there's been a number of criticism against this pro-life vigil, and there is a potential members' bill going through Scottish Parliament which will end the practice, making it illegal. So today we chat with the head of the Scottish Catholic Media Office, Peter Kearney, to hear his response, and in particular the response to the Daily Record's attack article on the 40 Day for Life group. So Peter, thanks for joining us remotely here today in the Sancta studio. We've been standing back from this issue and looking in concern at the increasing vitriol, really, you could call it, from the Daily Record stances on Catholic issues in the last week. What has been your thoughts on that and the response?
It is unfortunate, to be honest, that the Daily Record have taken such an assertive and a combative position on the whole question of buffer zones. Now, buffer zones, as you know and has been discussed before, is something that's proposed by an MSP with the support of the Scottish Government, and the Scottish Parliament will be debating it. The position of the Church on that has been quite clear. We've responded to the consultation and said we think it's unnecessary, first of all, which is in line with what Police Scotland say, and it's potentially an enormous infringement on human rights. Now, whatever way you look at it, is it's a contentious issue. So it's surprising that a newspaper like the Daily Record have decided to give their wholesale and complete backing to it without taking into account that there is more than one perspective.
And yourself, Peter, you attempted to set the record straight with the Daily Record, if you pardon the pun.
Literally, yes. It was obvious at the beginning of the week that they weren't looking at this in any sort of balanced way, and that they were only looking at the one perspective, and that is those who support buffer zones. So I did get in touch with them and said, look, would you be willing to take something from me that gives the other perspective, the other side of the argument? And initially the response was very positive. They said, yes, we would. In fact, I'm sure a lot of our readers probably have a different view on this, so it would be good to be able to inform them. I duly sent them a 500-word article giving the other side, and it disappeared. And when I chased that up, I was told the editor doesn't want to use it. Now, that is really unfortunate. And I have to say also, that's quite a change in even just recent years. It's not that long ago that I had newspaper editors saying to me, we see our paper as a platform for debate. Newspaper editors used to think that newspapers were really a forum where people could discuss things, whether it was in the course of a news story or through opinion columns or in their letters page. In other words, arguments could be had, discussions could be made, and people would come to a point of view, having been informed on all sides of an issue. And sadly, that does seem to be slipping.
I mean, you mentioned previously when speaking to us that there was, in a sense, a chilling effect that this law would have. Do you think the stance the Daily Record has taken with regarding minority views, because let's not beat around the bush, as Catholics we are in the minority in Scotland, do you think it will have a negative or equally chilling effect on the rights of these minority groups like Catholics, for example, that their views are being suppressed?
Very much so. That is a serious concern, that we are in this culture now of cancellation. And one of the most effective ways to cancel an opinion and a perspective is just to ignore it. Don't give it any coverage at all. And of course, that has an effect on the beliefs. It has an effect on the morale of those who hold those beliefs. You're probably right in what you say. Well, you are right to say that Catholics are a minority in Scotland. That's obviously true. However, on this question of should we have state and police enforced zones where people cannot express their opinion. Now, it doesn't matter at the moment. This debate is about whether they'll be around a hospital or not. It's probably worth remembering that what's being proposed here could massively widen that out. Most of our abortions in Scotland now take place medicinally. It's through the use of pharmaceutical products, which would make potentially every pharmacy in Scotland an abortion provider or an abortion location. So this legislation could apply to a zone around all pharmacies. It would also potentially make all GP practices in Scotland providers, and it could end up having zones around it. So we could end up with enormous areas of the country where people can't express themselves, can't give their opinion, and that's a huge, huge infringement. I think this is one of these issues. It's a bit like the assisted suicide issue. People's initial reaction to that is, well, if someone's at the end of their life and they're in extreme pain, they should be allowed to die with dignity. Then you start to drill in and give a bit more detail and say, that's not quite how it would work. And if you take a look at where this has been enacted in other parts of the world, you see a very, very dangerous, slippery slope. And people slowly begin to change their mind, they pull back. I think the buffer zone issue is a bit like that. People think, well, if it's keeping violent, intimidatory behaviour away from vulnerable women, all to the good. But when you go a bit deeper, you say, there's no violence, there's no intimidation. Police Scotland have been really clear about this. They've never arrested anyone for assault, for breach of the peace, for intimidation. And in the response to this consultation, they said, we don't see any need for new law. You're looking at basically some pensioners saying prayers on the pavement.
I mean, what's fascinating about the response to your article we shared yesterday on various social media networks is the superficiality of the arguments against it. It really comes down to feelings now. We're trying to legislate on feelings, and where does that end? You've got a situation where you might upset someone, or you ask for evidence of, as you've mentioned, there is no evidence of intimidation or violence at these prayer vigils. So really we're at a very worrying stage now where the argumentation is really not so much about buffer zones, more anti-faith. A lot of the comments we hear are, God can hear you anywhere, pray in your own home, pray in private. So do you think, Peter, that this is essentially an overreach of the government to put people of faith in a box?
It's very clearly an overreach, absolutely, because what it does is it reaches beyond fundamental and hard-won human rights, like the ones I've mentioned: freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. And we have to ask ourselves, where does that stop? Once this is established, when people are told, take away for a moment the topic. The topic is the expression of opinion and differences of opinion on the topic of abortion. Put that to one side and let's ask ourselves, what if it was a different topic? This happens, for example, regularly outside the Trident submarine base down at Fastlane. There have been vigils there. There was one just over a year ago. The Archbishop of Glasgow stood with the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland. They had some signs, they said some prayers. What they were doing was very much designed to influence the people going in and out of that base, or maybe passing by that base. And nobody said, what if one of the workers going into that base is upset by what they're saying or what they're doing? Surely, if they're upset or offended, it should be scrapped. Now, nobody suggests that. These have been happening for decades, these protests, these vigils, and no one thinks they should be shut down. So what I would say to people is it's important to look at this in its widest possible context. If you can get what you've rightly called government overreach and say a certain group of people can be silenced or prevented from expressing their opinions, there's nothing to stop that happening in other areas too.
So we're coming up to the start of Lent, and of course this is where the focus really gathers momentum on these prayer vigils. What do you think will be perhaps the next actions of the bill going through Parliament? Will there be any foreseeable change in the law?
Certainly from the point of view of the Church, our consultation response has been really clear, which is to oppose this. That will continue. There'll be evidence taken on this bill. And at that stage, again, the point will be made that this is, well, primarily this is unnecessary. It's unnecessary because, as I've described it, it's the equivalent to taking a sledgehammer to smash an invisible nut. There is not a problem here. There haven't been attacks. There haven't been prosecutions. There haven't been cases of criminal, intimidatory behaviour of any description. So there is no need for this. But the other point is that it is a huge infringement on human rights. So what we can only hope is that MSPs listen to what's being said from the Church and from others and accept that at the moment, with the problems that the entire country faces, social, political, economic, cost of living, etc., as well as crime issues too, this might not be the best use of MSP's time.